Did you ever wish you could live in your favorite Nicktoons worlds? We've all been there. Whether it's magic chalk, fairy godparents, or ghost powers, there's a lot about these guys' lives to be envious of. That being said, with the threats looming in some of these worlds, you've sometimes got to wonder if it would really be worth it. Nicktoons villains come in all shapes, sizes, and even species, but which have the potential to destroy the entire universe, and which ones struggle to steal a fast food sandwich?
Terrorizing minimum wage workers. Boom.
I'm Kifinosi with Wicked Binge, and this is Nicktoons Villains, Weak to Powerful. We're kicking things off with the antagonists who just barely qualify as villains, and don't pose much of a threat. These are the D-tier villains. Taking home a pretty easy last place position is Angelica Pickles from Rugrats. This shouldn't be any surprise, considering that Angelica is, a toddler. She's a 3-year-old child, and as a result, she doesn't have any particularly impressive skills on a physical or intellectual level. That's not to say Angelica doesn't have any strengths, though. For a toddler, she has an impressive capability to manipulate the adults around her to get what she wants. Like in the Rugrats in Paris movie, where she manipulated Koko into giving her a float in the parade in exchange for trying to get Chaz to marry her.
And who said the Americans are greedy?
A bratty child can be a handful, but not much of one compared to the later characters on our list. Coming from an equally lighthearted show, next up is Roger Klotz from Doug. There's not too much to say about Klotz. Honestly, he's your typical elementary/middle school bully, going out of his way to pick on the weaker kids like Doug and his friends. Like Angelica, he doesn't have any impressive abilities aside from what you'd expect from a bully. He intimidates those weaker than him and tries to manipulate those stronger than him. While we give him a few points for being older and stronger than Angelica, we still won't say he's much more of a threat due to his low intelligence and a lack of favor with most of the people around him. From a kid to a teen and now to a full-on adult. Next on our list is Ed Bighead from Rocko's Modern Life. While Ed is nowhere near a supervillain or anything, this grumpy old toad is the very essence of a bad neighbor. He's incredibly vindictive and downright mean, constantly insulting the people around him and using them to his advantage. Either that, or using his wealth and Karen-esque demeanor to try and get them evicted. But while his temper is nowhere near normal in just about every other regard, Ed is a pretty normal guy. While he's not winning any Nobel Peace Prizes, he's also not falling any lower.
I'm too big to fail.
You can always count on Earl if you need some protection from him after all. Now it's time to get into the characters who are at least somewhat threatening. While they're a bit stronger or just have more influence, these are C-tier villains. Kicking off this category is one of the most unfortunate foes on the list, Dorcas from Planet Sheen. Really, whether or not Dorcas even deserves the title of villain is up for debate. But regardless, Dorcas is doing his darndest to get revenge on Sheen and get his rightful job back. Dorcas's specific skill set is rather mysterious, given that he's not really portrayed as much of a threat due to Sheen's luck at avoiding any schemes he does come up with. But he was smart enough to be the Emperor's advisor for a long time and generally uses his intellect to enact any plans he does have, which is at least worth some intellectual points. He does consistently get foiled by Sheen though, which definitely isn't the best look.
Yes, it is. Are you done?
Next we move from Planet Sheen to an even more mysterious planet. Next is Koko Labou from Rugrats in Paris. If we were ranking in terms of morality, she'd definitely be a lot lower on our list than she stands right now. Madame Labouche saw no issue with manipulating Chaz and his 2-year-old child into almost marrying into her family just so she could get a promotion with the image of a family person.
Love is on the menu.
The fact that she was able to use her wealth, allies, and other resources to do this is sort of impressive, and had it not been for that heart-wrenching wedding crash from Chucky, she would have succeeded. But since her plan was so relatively small scale, we have to place her lower than the characters who have actually posed great threats to others' safety. Points for intelligence though. Moving back into simple bully territory, next are the Greaser Dogs from Cat Dog. Cliff, Shriek, and Lube are 3 angry dogs who are always giving Cat Dog a hard time. Being attacked by a tough human being or an animal would be a tough time for sure, so the Greaser Dogs have earned a higher spot than the last few characters by default, not to mention the little detail of there being 3 of them. As rough as they can seem in the show though, this is really a case of 3 street thugs teaming up against 2 guys. I mean, 1 guy? How does that work? In any case, while they're definitely strong, they don't compare to other foes we'll see down the line. If you're looking for an instructor to discipline your pets, look no further than George Liquor from Ren and Stimpy. We had to mention at least one antagonist from the Ren and Stimpy show, and who better than the guy who was so infamous that he helped get his biggest episode banned. The episode, Man's Best Friend, sees him adopting Ren and Stimpy and putting them through rigorous training that would more aptly be described as corporal punishment. And frankly, even that term is sugarcoating it. George is a huge man with a short temper, and the way he treats animals is no doubt a sign that he's low on fun morals, and restraint.
You boys are gonna love your old pal George Liquor.
While he's not going to be taking over the universe, he wouldn't stand down from beating the crap out of anyone therein. You may be surprised that Boog from Fanboy and Chum Chum made it to this next spot. After all, Boog is perhaps the dumbest bully we've discussed yet. While he has affinity for booping kids into oblivion, surely that isn't enough to call him a major threat, right? Nor is his impressive skill at Chimp Chomp, but we have to give Boog some credit, lest he unleash upon us his ultimate weapon, the H-Bop. This is an attack so powerful that it blew the roof off the Frosty Mart and sent Lenny flying to another county. Honestly, we should count ourselves lucky that he's just a bully.
Time to bop till they drop!
In a brute strength sense, he's easily the strongest villain we've discussed so far. Up next, we have our first joint entry, Scientist Number 1 and Pete from the Angry Beavers. They're far from the most famous villains in Nicktoons history, but these scientists are a force to be reckoned with, when they want to be, at least. They're constantly building new machines to experiment on the pointy weasels, I mean beavers, and while they don't seem to have any world domination aspirations, the fact that they have the funds to do these experiments constantly is as impressive as it is terrifying. No list of Nicktoons villains would be complete without the ickiest of them all, Vicky from Fairly Odd Parents. Vicky is an evil babysitter who's lucky enough to live in a town where all the parents are blissfully unaware of how she abuses the kids in her care. Bullying kids significantly younger than herself isn't really that impressive, but Vicky goes further than just bullying.
Cry all you want. I get paid by the hour.
She uses people for everything, from having kids carry her around to using her little sister as a toilet plunger. Even if we ignore her becoming a dictator in the Channel Chasers special, which was due to the magical remote, Vicky's downright ruthless, smart enough to exploit a town of complete morons to make money and abuse those beneath her. There's a reason even her parents are absolutely mortified by her, but as vile as she is, Vicky's only as strong as her circumstances allow her to be. Her power comes solely from how ruthless she is.
Well, my work here is done.
Now it's time to talk about a real monster. Literally, it's the Gromble from Real Monsters! The Gromble is a terrifying teacher who uses intimidation to whip his students into shape. Those who give a subpar scaring performance can expect anything from a stern lecture to straight up attempted murder by cannibalism. When you're a monster who even freaks out most of the other monsters, you know you've made it big, which makes it all the more terrifying that he isn't even halfway down our list. There are plenty of characters who are even more monstrous, like Earl from Rocko's Modern Life. It's been said that there's no such thing as a bad dog, and as nice of a sentiment as that is, you can't subscribe to it if you've met Earl. He's been around since the pilot, and while he doesn't appear super often, Earl is an absolute menace to society. We're not saying that lightly either. Earl has made an enemy out of pretty much everyone in O-Town, except for Bev Bighead. Earl will attack first and ask questions later, and he's all out of questions. In the pilot episode, he even almost succeeded in eating Spunky in one bite. This dog means business. Even being sent to another planet isn't enough to keep Earl away from society. Speaking of not being easy to beat, next up is Dennis from the original SpongeBob movie. One of the few antagonists in the SpongeBob universe who makes Plankton look almost pleasant in comparison. Dennis is a ruthless bounty hunter who hunts SpongeBob and Patrick down throughout the second and third acts of the movie. He can punch with enough force to send a burly thug flying into a tugboat, sinking said tugboat down in the process. And that's not all. With his spiky cleats, anything is possible, except survival. Of course, Dennis is held back by Bigger Boot and manages to live through being crushed by the giant Cyclops. This shows some impressive defense on top of his offense, making him one of the scariest characters so far in terms of brute strength. And rounding out this category is La Sombra from Hey Arnold. While Hey Arnold is usually a pretty lighthearted show, La Sombra clearly did not get that memo. This treasure-hunting jungle pirate is as deadly as he is treacherous. Like Vicky, he has no issue hurting innocent people and even kids, even taking great pleasure in it.
Eduardo, La Sombra. Abraham Lincoln, Frida Kahlo. Easy.
Yeah.
But La Sombra always has a bigger goal in mind, which makes him an even scarier threat. La Sombra has incredible foresight, always planning several steps ahead for whatever obstacles he predicts might get in the way of his goals. This goes hand in hand with his intense determination, which has manifested itself in his body fighting off the effects of a deadly poison. He's a master of manipulation and disguise, and coupled with his total lack of morality, this makes him a force to be reckoned with in just about any situation. Alright, now you could say we're moving on to the real villains of the list. They probably won't take over the whole world, but they'll definitely leave a mark in at least a city or two. These are the B-tier villains. Kicking off this category is Morag from the Loud House movie. Despite her appearance, Morag isn't a witch, but rather a housekeeper who grows so annoyed with the Loud family that she takes control of the Dragonstone to use Leela the Dragon as a puppet to try and become the Duchess by force. While Morag herself isn't too intimidating, the fact that she was able to both get her hands on the Dragonstone and use it pretty effectively is fairly impressive. Next up is Scrawl from Chalk Zone. Despite what that insanely hard theme song would have you think, Chalk Zone is one one of Nickelodeon's most lighthearted series, which is why Scrawl is such a standout bad guy for the ensemble cast. An amalgamation made by other kids who took Rudy's magic chalk, Scrawl resents his creator for how ugly he is and often manipulates him and the rest of the citizens of Chalk Zone to try and take over with the magic chalk. Since he's only a threat to Chalk Zone, whose only consistent human guests are Penny and Rudy, we wouldn't put him in this category. That is, if it weren't for the episode Scrawl's Brain. In this episode, he invents a working human brain that can hypnotize the entire population of Chalk Zone and lure them into a pit with the threat of burying them in rice pudding. Even though the brain turns on him, the fact that Scrawl just casually created sentient life and temporarily enslaved an entire dimension is actually terrifying.
A great creator. That's right.
Even if that dimension is made of drawings, wonder how a Doodlebob Scrawl team up would go. Creeping into the next spot is the Chameleon from Tough Puppy. The Chameleon is one of the simplest villains on our list in terms of power. With his bodysuit, he's able to not just blend in with the environment around him, but also transform into people and objects with ease.
Hey, roomies! What are you doing?
This obviously makes Chameleon a master of disguise already, but tack on his versatile movement, being able to crawl on walls and fight on par with Kitty Catswell, and you've got a foe who is a force to be reckoned with.
Little robot, a rocket launcher, some kind of spooky jelly-like blob.
It's no wonder he gives Tough so much trouble, but not quite as much as the brilliant leader of Doom, Verminius Snaptrap from Tough Puppy. Okay, maybe brilliant isn't the right word, but don't go thinking Snaptrap is just a small-scale threat. He's intimidating enough to have practically unquestioned loyalty from his minions, even though he frequently abuses them for seemingly no reason, especially Larry. Poor Larry.
Yellow. Yes, is I am Stinky there. I am Stinky? You sure are!
Snaptrap is chaotic evil incarnate, and while he's not the smartest villain on our list, he's managed to enact some pretty heinous plans, like nearly launching all of Petropolis into the sun, for instance. His power isn't quite enough to get him any higher, as some characters later down the line even make Snaptrap's chaos look totally normal.
Oh, that's true.
But he gets an A for effort, in the B tier, granted. Following a similar vein is another evil organization leader, Glowface from the X's. This was one of Nickelodeon's most obscure cartoons, so it's no surprise that this villain followed suit. The best way we can think of to describe Glowface is that, like Snaptrap, his plans are often impulsive and even downright stupid. He's just a little more of a serious threat. From science to magic, up next is Mr. Denzel Crocker from the Fairly Odd Parents. While Vicky sometimes found herself becoming a larger scale villain due to Cosmo and Wanda's magic, Crocker was actively seeking out said magic to use for his own devices. While he always fails miserably, there have been some times where he's come dangerously close to capturing the fairies with his various gadgets used to track them down. Crocker was at his scariest in the two-part special Abracatastrophe, where he manages to capture Wanda and use her alongside Timmy's magical wishing muffin to take over the world with rule-free wishes. If it weren't for the fact that he was using someone else's power to achieve this, we'd give him even more points, but the fact that Crocker was able to deliberately pull this off is nothing short of amazing.
Night, crazy guy.
Another evil scientist is next, Professor Finbar Calamitus from Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius. He may not be able to finish any of his inventions, but, where were we going with that? Anyway, Calamitus is a brilliant scientist who's come up with a ton of inventions that have nearly left Retroville in shambles. Calamitus is no joke, and we're giving him the slight upper hand over Crocker since he's a little bit less crazy and doesn't rely on magic for his world domination schemes.
You weren't watching the neutron detector. Friendship over.
But given that aforementioned quirk of his, he's never quite been able to reach his full potential, which keeps us from putting him any higher up. Rounding out this category is Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender. The princess of the Fire Nation, Azula is a firebending prodigy who's been sculpted into a war machine since her childhood by her father.
You don't see the family resemblance?
She holds great influence over the Fire Nation, being skilled enough to use both fire and lightning to her advantage. Azula also displays very high intelligence and is able to easily get whatever information or alliances she needs from others just using either charisma or intimidation. It took the skills of Katara and Zuko in tandem to ultimately defeat her, and that was when she'd already been having a mental breakdown. But anyone would probably have a mental breakdown if they had to face off against these next characters. These are the A-tier villains. When it comes to serious villains, few are as intimidating as Amon from The Legend of Korra, especially for season 1. Although he's the first of many villains in the series, Amon is no small-scale threat. In the world of Avatar, benders hold extreme powers, so having the ability to remove a person's bending abilities is impressive on another level. This alone gives Amon a lot of points, and he's only made more threatening by his eloquent speaking skills, which allow him to intimidate allies to follow orders and enemies to submit to them. Not to mention he's a highly skilled waterbender to boot.
I believe he is about to electrocute me. I am currently wetting my pants.
While you could argue that his desire for a just, equal society is a noble cause, the way he goes about it makes him an undeniable tyrant who has the capacity to handicap much of the world's population. We're going ghost for this next entry. It's Skulker from Danny Phantom. He may only be the secondary antagonist of the series as a whole, but Skulker is not a threat to be taken lightly. He has all the powers you'd expect from a ghost, like invisibility, flight, and the ability to phase through objects with ease, but due to his small size, he prefers to use a giant battlesuit equipped with various weapons like ectoplasmic nets and slime that can bind his opponents. It was tough limiting how many of Danny's ghostly enemies to use on our list, but we chose Skulker because of how darn persistent he was in chasing Danny. As a collector of rare items and creatures, he's even able to use his collection against future victims. Even, dare I speak his name, the mighty Box Ghost? Beware! Beware! Who's so terrifyingly powerful we actually disqualified him from the list because we wanted to give the smaller threats a chance to shine.
Not twice.
While his regular form is the furthest thing from a villain, Duty Mode Grr from Invader Zim is a force to be reckoned with. In the episode, Grr goes crazy and stuff, Zim decides to lock Grr into duty mode.
Yes, sir!
The result is a Grr who's fully functional, able to take information in at a mere glance and manipulate technology to suit his whims, and even revolt against his incompetent master in an effort to take over Earth by himself. Given how silly Grr is, it's easy to forget that he's equipped with a ton of insanely powerful weapons. Even Zim knew that Grr was too much of a threat for him to handle when he actually wanted to use them, so he rightfully decided to revert him to the taco-loving mongoose dog we all know and love. Next up is the necromancer musician, Sartana of the Dead from El Tigre. She's recently come a bit back into the limelight due to her appearance as a boss battle in Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2, and rightly so. This lady is no small threat. Her most notable asset is the use of her 7-stringed guitar, which can raise the dead and even control them. This means that Sartana has an army of zombies pretty much wherever and whenever she wants them. Her weakness comes from the fact that once her guitar is destroyed, she turns to dust, but she always seems to come back somehow, which earns her a lot of points for endurance. All that said, we're giving the title of Superior Evil Guitarist to Ember McLean from Danny Phantom. Though a secondary antagonist, Ember was impactful enough to remain one of Danny Phantom's most popular characters.
Whoa! Ember McLean! Sweet! I'm your biggest fan!
No, I'm your biggest fan!
Her guitar has several powers that can attack her opponents on physical and even psychological levels. She can not only attack with fire and shockwaves, but she can cast love spells and even hypnotize massive audiences of people as long as they're cheering her on. The only major weakness Ember has is that she does rely on said cheering for her power, but given how popular she can make herself, that's rarely any issue. Also, she's not constantly in danger of turning to dust, so that's nice. Next up is Kuvira from Korra. Kuvira, like Amon, uses cunning manipulation and intimidation to get people on her side in the hopes to take over the world. She acts as a stern dictator with plans to take over all the nations by force, starting with the Earth Kingdom.
When people don't cooperate, we must find other ways of convincing them to join.
Kuvira is a master of earth bending and metal bending, and rather than trying to eradicate bending, Kuvira is okay with it, as long as it's being used to further her goals. She also had plans to build a spirit energy cannon before she was double-crossed by Bolin and Varric. Had those two not retained some of their collective conscience, she very well might have succeeded in her plans. We have a magical entry up next, The Tricks from Winx Club. This show was Nickelodeon's answer to Magical Girl anime, and the tricks are a reminder that magical isn't always a positive word.
Time to go fairy hunting, sisters.
With the power of the Gloomix, their powers are increased exponentially. Collectively, the three of them can manipulate ice, storms, and even shadows. One powerful elemental witch is enough of a threat, but when you have three of them working together with the help of a power-enhancing amulet, you've got a threat that proves Avatar isn't the only series that can make nature absolutely terrifying. Speaking of, we now have another villain from the Avatar universe, Fire Lord Oai from Avatar The Last Airbender. Everyone knows that everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked, of course, and it was all thanks to this jerk right here. Oai could well be the most vile villain in Nicktoons history, but we're here today to talk about power, which isn't too far off, honestly. Like Kuvira, he's a tyrant who planned to take over the world, but Oai was smarter, stronger, and had even more resources under his belt. He was able to manipulate his daughter and entire nation into following him, whether out of dutiful obedience or fearful submission, both whatever. He's a master firebender, lightning bender, and fought toe-to-toe against Aang in the Avatar state, only being defeated when his bending was removed. A fitting end for a truly evil man. We have our last Avatar entry up next, and it's the biggest one yet. It's time to discuss the Red Lotus from The Legend of Korra. Most fans can agree that Zahir's anarchist group were by far the best, most interesting villains in Korra's adventure. Each of the members is extremely talented in their respective element and use it in extremely innovative ways. Zahir, the leader, is naturally the biggest threat. He succeeded in freeing the other members, each of whom has showcased the ability to take on whole armies on their own. Their goal? To destroy all the world's leaders and the Avatar for a more just society based on power above all else. Yeah, we mean destroy. This man straight up killed the Earth Queen on screen using what we can only describe as the exact opposite of Sandy's air helmet from SpongeBob. It's finally time to move on to our last category. When these guys talk about taking over the world, they're dead serious about it because they actually could. These are the S-tier villains. Kicking off this category is Sheldon J. Plankton from SpongeBob SquarePants. No doubt the most iconic Nicktoons villain out there, Plankton spends most of his time trying, and failing, to steal the Krabby Patty's secret formula. His failure to do so, along with the fact that he's a microscopic organism, make him seem like a total wimp at first glance, but his intellect more than makes up for that. Plankton has an incredibly large wealth of resources, from mind control switches to gigantic robots, even to a machine that allows him to switch lives with another being.
Mr. Plankton?
If Plankton weren't so fixated on stealing the formula, he'd be able to take over at least the world with ease, and he'd come pretty close in the original SpongeBob movie, where he was able to enslave all of Bikini Bottom with his new bucket helmets.
All hail Plankton! All hail Plankton!
Hilarious and tiny though he may be, Plankton's a menace, and sometimes the evilest things come in the smallest packages. From a tiny villain to a secondary villain, next is Baron Draxum from Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Draxum's goal at the start of the series is to mutate the entire population, and given that he's able to make mutants of his own, it stands to reason that he at least has the potential to make his ambitions a reality.
I must eliminate them.
He's smart enough to know that he won't be able to do it unless the turtles are either his allies or his victims though, and acts accordingly until his redemption arc. Aside from the obvious intelligence that comes from being a master scientist, Draxum also possesses superhuman strength and a lot of different powers. He's able to manipulate plants and contort his body using ridiculously powerful mutations. This makes him capable of fighting all four of the turtles at once, making him a pretty terrifying enemy to be on the wrong side of. But when it comes to TMNT villains, y'all know we couldn't exclude Shredder from the discussion. This guy's had countless variations over the years, but for the sake of simplicity, we'll mainly consider his iteration in Rise of the TMNT. On top of being highly skilled in combat, both in terms of weapons and martial arts, Shredder has decades of battle experience and can basically be described as a peak-level human being. With his immense power, mobility, endurance, speed, and any other RPG-esque stat you could think of, Shredder is a nearly unstoppable opponent who's able to wipe out entire cities with ease. He's only held back by the fact that there are thankfully several mutant reptiles constantly ready to try and kill him.
You think your puny mystic weapon can harm me?
Danny's not the only one fighting ghosts. Next is the Flying Dutchman from SpongeBob. When he's not starring as the main villain in a janky PS2 game, the Dutchman is content to roam the seven seas and haunt his prey. He's not a particularly violent guy, and given his power set, we have to thank Neptune for that. The Dutchman can breathe fire, transform into various monsters and even weapons, and even casually rip open the fabric of time and space to send people down into an abyss of horrible despair like he does to Squidward in the episode Shanghai. Oh, yeah, there's also the fact that he's able to grant wishes.
3. You get 3 wishes.
Just like a genie. A facet of his power that's brought up shockingly little in the SpongeBob universe, as is the fact that he's basically the Grim Reaper of their world. When it comes to granting wishes, though, we have to mention the Pixies and Anti-Fairies from Fairly Odd Parents. While these two races of fairy are very different from one another, one being a group that treats magic as business and the other being one that solely uses it to create misery, they have one thing in common. They use all the magic of your average fairy world resident with the added benefit of not playing by the rules. This means that their wishes are often much more ruthless and calculated than those of normal fairies and their godchildren. While this makes them incredibly versatile and powerful, they still have to answer to Jorgen von Strangle at the end of the day. As a result, while their magic has very few boundaries, they still have a limit to just how far they can go. The Bronze Medal of Power goes to Vlad Plasmus from Danny Phantom. Any way you slice it, Vlad is one of the most impressive villains in Nickelodeon history. He's the ghostly alter ego of Vlad Masters, a successful billionaire who's blended into society despite his constant efforts to destroy his old friend Jack Fenton and win Maddie's hand. Vlad has the finances, intelligence, and people skills to use people to his advantage both in the human and ghost worlds. And to think we haven't even touched on his ghost ghost powers yet. He's able to fight on par with Danny, has his own portal to the ghost zone, and knows exactly how to use leverage and intimidation to keep his ghostly identity a secret. With powerful lasers, extreme speed and strength, and everything else we've mentioned, Vlad is as strong as he is vindictive.
I don't suppose you can move any faster.
In the series finale, he even uses the approach of a deadly comet to strong-arm the people of Amity Park into letting him rule in exchange for saving them. Good thing he couldn't even touch the dang thing. Our runner-up position goes to Vexus from My Life as a Teenage Robot. She's a robot supremacist who desperately wants to get Jenny to join her hive mind. Fair enough. She does this in her first appearance by infecting her with a robotic parasite that mutates her body beyond recognition. Vexus's ultimate goal is to have control over all robots in the world, eradicate humanity, and keep her metallic minions as slaves thereafter. Jenny isn't her only target either. She's successfully duped her entire home planet into believing that Jenny is a villain and is trying to get them to hunt her down to join what they don't yet realize is basically a cult.
There's a surprise.
She's definitely less of a threat now than ever, given that she's just posing as a teenager at Jenny's school, but that thirst for revenge after losing her kingdom won't be easy to quench. But when it comes to causing destruction, doom, if you will, we have to give the gold medal of power to Zim from Invader Zim. To justify his #1 placement, let's go through a short list of the many powerful feats Zim has under his belt.
His name is Zim.
He transported the Earth directly into the path of the tallest, creating a florpus hole that distorted the reality and could have easily destroyed it once it made contact. He has the power to transport people and objects through time and space and uses it for some nefarious purposes, whether that's sabotaging Dib's life and ultimately killing him in Bad Bad Rubber Piggy or stealing organs from kids at school in Dark Harvest. He has a massive arsenal of Earth-destroying weaponry and has the help of both Gur and the almighty Mini-Moose on his side. You get the idea. Many of Zim's destructive feats are less intentional and more of a side effect of his chaotic, incompetent personality, but it's that very incompetence that makes him our #1 choice. While the last few characters have all shown capability to at least come close to destroying the Earth, Zim has caused worldwide natural disasters in multiple episodes, casually killed hundreds, if not thousands, of people, both human and Urkin, and most terrifying of all, has absolutely no idea what he's doing 99% of the time. He's like, what would happen if you gave a rambunctious toddler a brick of cocaine, access to every military resource in the US, and told him to just go nuts? Zim is terrifying, and as hilarious as he can be on screen, there's no doubt that Earth would be doomed if he were ever really sent here, intentionally or not.